dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Black Man Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Man Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you are dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Man Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Man Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Man Thinkin.
Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin, here on the dominant force of internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Happy to be with you. Well, let's go into immigration, shall we? But let's not approach this in the way that the media and progressives in this nation would expect for you to go about it. Recently, the foreign minister of Hungary engaged in an interview, and I say engaged is more like an argument as opposed to an interview, with a member of the press in UK. Her name is Emily Maitlis, and they were talking about migrants coming into Hungary and how the Hungarian government and the people were looking to respond to that.
Lux or an invitation or security, whereas really it comes down to something much more simple with your government, doesn't it? When you look at Viktor Orban's words, he's compared immigration to a flu epidemic, he's talked of Muslim invaders, he's talked of Christian Hungary and a mixed population with no sense of identity, and he's called the people coming in potential terrorists. So this isn't actually about immigration, is it? It's about xenophobia.
No, I have to reject that, and I take it as an insult, what you have just said, because we Hungarians, we do have the right, and no one can take that away from us. We have the right to make our own decision, whom we would like to allow to enter the territory in Hungary, and who we do not allow to enter the territory of Hungary.
You don't want to come in are Muslims, is that right?
Just if you can let me finish. But I would like to answer your previous question, because that was concluded by a very serious insult against my country, and I have to reject that again, because I always have shown respect to everyone who asks me, but I expect respect not for myself, because who cares, but for my country and for the people I represent. And calling a country xenophobic, it's an insult, especially if you put into consideration Hungary, and no one can take away the right of decision of us with whom we would like to live together. And yes, it is our intention to keep Hungary a Hungarian country. And yes, we do not agree with those ones who say that multiculturalism is by definition good. If you say that, we respect that.
So you stand by the side of Muslim invaders, right?
Sorry?
You stand by this phrase that your Prime Minister used of Muslim invaders.
I stand by, of course, all of the statements of my Prime Minister, and stand by our position and stand by the position that if you allow hundreds of thousands of people to enter the territory of the European Union without control, without check, does it give the opportunity for the terrorist organizations to send their terrorists to Europe? Yes, it does. What we don't want is a massive illegal influx coming from the south to us. We want to keep Hungary a Hungarian country, and we don't think that multiculturalism is by definition good. If you think so, if people in this country think so, we respect that, no problem.
The people of Hungary intend to keep Hungary a Hungarian nation. Period. They reject the idea of the globalists saying everybody should live anywhere they need to, and you just need to accept them and to bend over backwards in whatever fashion you need to accept them. Hungarians want Hungary to remain Hungarian. They want it to remain Christian, and their government is reflecting their wishes. This upsets the globalists, because the whole idea is to remove any type of individual identity, including that of nationality or culture, because then it makes them easier to rule as a group. Hungary's rejecting that. And to see a government official stand up to a globalist the way the foreign minister of Hungary did, I wish I had somebody in the United States who would do that. Unfortunately, that's just not the case right now. Hungary's not the only nation that's getting into the pushback. A few weeks ago, there was a boat that was coming out of Libya, carried a little bit more than 600 migrants heading north, and Italy said, I don't know where you're going, but you ain't coming here. And actually, Malta followed suit, but for different reasons.
Over 600 migrants remain stranded on a ship in the Mediterranean Sea. It's after Italy's new populist government has refused permission for the vessel to dock, and Malta is also not welcoming anyone. Italy's Interior Minister Matteo Salvini tweeted saying #Let's close our ports. Malta's Prime Minister Joseph Muscat also tweeted saying they're concerned with Italy's authorities. They manifestly go against international rules and risk creating a dangerous situation for all those involved. His second says Malta is in full conformity with international obligations and will not take the vessel in its ports. Doctors Without Borders operates the Aquarius ship together with the SOS Mediterranean organisations. The charities say they have enough supplies to feed the migrants at least for another day. By law, it will be difficult for Italy to refuse a safe haven, according to Reuters. Salvini says Italy should not be the only country taking in boats arriving from North Africa and urges Malta to allow the ship to disembark. In another tweet, he says, today even the ship Sea-Watch 3, a German NGO, and the Dutch flag is off the coast of Libya, waiting to bring the umpteenth load of immigrants to Italy. But Italy has stopped bending its head and obeying.
Italy has stopped bending its head and obeying. You really need to understand this. The strategy is very simple. Let's take down Italy because they are closest in proximity to Libya. We will flood them. We will destroy their culture. And once that is full, then we will take them to other countries, either directly or through Italy, which will have been destroyed. The Italian government, the new populist government, understand what that means. They were elected by the people of Italy, and they said they don't want to take any more migrants. That's another country going in the face of the globalist progressive movement. Malta made an excuse saying, well, we're within our rights and we're not going to take any more. Exactly, same thing. We don't want them here either. We're not looking to take on all these people who have no allegiance to our culture, no affinity with our country, and then have to take care of them while they work from within, not to assimilate, but to change. They're not interested in doing it anymore. Interestingly, Spain came to the rescue of this ship, which had more than 600. And that's odd when you think about it, because the migrants coming over are predominantly Muslim. And Spain, in its history a few centuries ago, granted, they had the unfortunate occurrence of having their Christian government totally replaced by violence, by the way, with a Muslim government. That went on for several centuries. And then in the 15th century, that Muslim government was overthrown by Christians again. And then the century following, Spain expelled virtually every Muslim out of the country. So for them to take in these latest migrants who are also Muslim is a little bit interesting, but that's in fact what they agreed to do.
The overcrowded ship has been floating in the Mediterranean Sea since Saturday. Aid workers said Monday they had enough food and water for a few days, but not enough space.
We have food and water enough to keep these people 2 to 3 days. But this is not what we wish, because it's overcrowded. People are sleeping in the deck. It is not comfortable at all. They are weak, tired, exhausted.
The Spanish government responded after both the European Union and the United Nations Refugee Agency appealed to the Mediterranean countries to allow disembarkation until the migrants' final destination is determined.
Let's remember that there are more than 123 children on the ship. There are reportedly people with very severe burns, people who are victims of torture and abuse.
The latest migrant crisis occurs as the southern European countries get overwhelmed by unending waves of migrants smuggled into the sea from the North African shores. Docking in Spain is only a temporary solution.
I don't think the problem is Italy's or Spain's. It's not Greece's problem. The problem is Europe's. The decision needs to be put on the table of the European Council in a determined and strong manner with a sense of solidarity, meaning that we all can't look away while the problem is being resolved by whoever has it closer.
More than 600,000 migrants have reached Italy by boat in the past 5 years, and its new government is refusing to take in more.
We asked Europe to share the burden of the migration emergency and not to leave us alone, as has happened over the past few years. This gesture goes in this direction, therefore I can't do anything else than thank the Spanish authorities who have accepted our invitation.
The European Union policy known as the Dublin Regulation stipulates that migrants seeking asylum in Europe must apply for it in the EU country where they first arrived. The regulation has put a heavy burden on Mediterranean nations such as Greece, Italy and Malta that are closest to the northern African shores. Zlatica Hoke, VOA News, Washington.
Interesting how they do that. They must apply for asylum in their country in which they first hit the European Union. Okay? So once they basically overrun Italy, that means anyone who gets to Italy is almost guaranteed asylum starting in Italy, because they don't have to stay in Italy. But there's no sense in sending them to another country who might say no. And then they're on the European continent, and then they have the advantage of the European Union rules to then freely go wherever they want. This is simply the idea of making the European continent something different than what it has been for millennia, and bringing them under a globalist rule. That's all this is. And what you're seeing is Hungary, Italy, and to a lesser degree Malta saying, we're really not down with this anymore. The problem, of course, is whether or not they're willing to actually get out of the European Union over this. I would say that they are, but that in and of itself, the immigration issue has not yet bubbled up to be a big enough issue to do it on its own. It did seem to be a big enough issue for Great Britain. Now, Spain, they simply aren't feeling the pain yet. They're a Mediterranean nation, but they're not all that close to Africa, not compared to Italy and some other countries. So their government is still full of globalists who are happy to do this, even knowing the history of Spain. In this country, we have had the interesting resignation of the ambassador to Estonia. And I find that interesting because what's happening is the quote-unquote populism in the United States, which is now being voiced through the President of the United States, finally exposed this ambassador and exposed a couple of others, and those people are finally having to move themselves out of the way.
The U.S. ambassador to Estonia resigned after announcing that he was disappointed by President Donald Trump's comments on European allies, the BNR reported. James Melville wrote on Facebook that Trump's words had led to his decision to retire. The U.S. president has imposed a European duty and continues to criticize allies from NATO. Other U.S. diplomats have also left their posts in recent months. In January, this was done by the ambassador to Panama, saying he was no longer able to serve under Trump. Another diplomat working for the U.S. mission in Somalia left his position with the explanation that the U.S. has abandoned human rights as a priority, the national radio adds.
Estonia, Panama, and Somalia. The one in Somalia talking about human rights as the reason they could no longer stay in the administration. Panama just saying, hey, I just got a difference of opinion, and Estonia saying, this criticism of Europe over one thing or another. Understand that these people were also globalists. The retirement of the ambassador to Estonia, and someone actually tried to say the early retirement. Dude's been in the government for 33 years. 33 years. I don't know that that's early. But understand what's really going on here. And it's really embarrassingly simple. The globalist view toward Muslim migration, because Muslim migration is the preferred tool of globalists and progressives to bring down non-Muslim nations, to get them to submit, if you will, to globalist rule. They are going to use people who will not assimilate into the cultures of the countries into which they go, and take advantage of the fact that most of Europe has a safety net system that can be exploited to the detriment of citizens. It can be exploited by non-citizens. And once you get to the point where you have enough people draining the resources of the populace, then you bring about a level of chaos from which the government cannot recover, and the people really don't have a method to overcome, because a lot of Europe, if you have a gun, you have a problem with the government. So, but you're seeing this now. You now have 4 countries who are making it clear that they're not cool with this Muslim immigration. A 5th, if you recognize that Angela Merkel in Germany is starting to have problems with her government. More than starting, her government is teetering. But so now you have Germany, you have Hungary, you have Italy, you have Malta. And now you have the United States, which is basically saying no over the loud cries of all the progressive activists, the media, and the politicians who are not really friends of the country that they are supposed to be representing. This is really very simple. You need to stop these people, and you need to take the stand that we have no problem welcoming people into our country, but they need to come according to our rules, and they need to come with the right attitude. You need to come into Hungary wanting to be part of Hungary, into Italy wanting to be part of Italy, into Malta desiring to be like Malta citizens, and into America, you need to want to be Americans, not citizens of the world, because this is our land. Not a popular position for those on the left, but the problem is those on the left are no longer able to control the narrative as they once did. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', we'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force of internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com. And WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Let's talk about Canada and trade for a minute. This is the Spitball response versus basically these guys are just throwing spitballs at battleships, tennis balls if you want to give them credit for using something of any substance, talking about how they're going to respond to the United States trade tariffs. AOL.com ran a story on the 30th of June. Canada struck back at the Trump administration over U.S. steel and aluminum tariffs, vowing to impose punitive measures on about $12.6 billion worth of American goods until Washington relents. These numbers sound interesting. They do, nevertheless. The Canadian tariffs will come into effect on July 1st and largely target U.S. steel and aluminum products, but also foodstuffs such as coffee, ketchup, and whiskeys, according to coffee, ketchup, and Canadian coffee. Wow. Okay. Or tariffs on the import of U.S. coffee, ketchup, and whiskeys. We will not escalate and we will not back down. Are you listening to this? This is Canada talking to the United States. This is a government official talking to reporters at a steel plant in Hamilton, Canada. Officials say the measures are designed in part to pressure Trump by focusing on goods from states where his political allies hold sway. Canada's Liberal Party government said last month it would retaliate after Trump moved against steel and aluminum imports from Canada and other nations, citing security concerns. We're acting very much in sorrow, not in anger. No, they're actually acting in desperation. And here is something else. The CBC, of course, wanted to report on this. They filed this report on the 28th of June about whether or not these retaliations are even going to matter.
The 4th of July party, hosted by the U.S. ambassador to Canada, is one of Ottawa's hottest summer events. But this year's crowd will be missing at least one high-profile guest.
I politely decline because I'm not happy with the direction of the American government and their constant attacks on our country.
Ottawa's mayor is taking a stand given the state of Canada-U.S. relations.
Seeing what's happening with these constant threats to our steel industry, aluminum, our car industry, the dairy industry, and I've sent my regrets.
The tensions are also front and center for the governor of the Bank of Canada. Stephen Poloz announced today trade issues will be a factor in the bank's upcoming decision on interest rates.
We're working to incorporate in our projections the effects of the recently announced U.S. steel and aluminum tariffs, along with the retaliatory measures, both in Canada and globally.
Canada is still finalizing that list of retaliatory tariffs which kick in on July 1st. Items built with American steel and aluminum will be included, which means those goods are going to be slapped with new duties and prices will go up for consumers. The opposition is worried about the ripple effect these tariffs may cause.
It's this government's job to determine what is the net loss to Canadians versus the net gain of putting that tariff on an American company to determine whether or not the greater good is being served. Because you can't gut industries in Canada because you want to show a sign of force.
In the midst of all this anxiety, the Prime Minister tried to deliver a message of calm this afternoon while meeting with a group of young business leaders.
We're going to be patient with the United States, but firm. That we will stand up for our interests, we will stand up for the benefits of trade for our citizens.
How long Canada's patience will last really is the big question here. The longer the trade dispute drags on with the United States, the more severe the consequences will be for the Canadian economy. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Ottawa.
This is hilarious. We will be patient, but we will be firm. We are acting in sorrow, not in anger. This is as though Canada really has any leverage. Let me help you out with something. The U.S. economy, measured in terms of GDP, $19.4 trillion. The Canadian economy, measured in terms of GDP, $1.6 trillion. There's more than an order of magnitude difference here. So patience, what patience? We're not going to back down? You're already back down. You have an economy that is not even 1/11th, not even 1/12th the size of the U.S. economy. You don't have any leverage. The U.S. doesn't need you. It can swallow your economy whole. And Trudeau was talking this nonsense after the G7 meetings last month. He had just come out of a meeting with Trump He said they shook hands, and then he made some interesting statements about how they're going to stand firm, similar to what you heard before. And Donald Trump had this response back on the 12th of June.
I left it. It was very friendly. When I got onto the plane, I think that Justin probably didn't know that Air Force One has about 20 televisions. And I see the television, and he's giving a news conference about how he will not be pushed around by the United States. And I say, push him around. We just shook hands. It was very friendly. And no, I have a good relationship with Justin Trudeau. I really did. Other than he had a news conference that he had because he assumed I was in an airplane and I wasn't watching. He learned that's going to cost a lot of money for the people of Canada. He learned, you can't do that. You can't do that.
For those of you who don't understand, Trump pretty much means what he says. He's going to get a better deal from the United States from Canada. Now, some will say, well, he's already got a good deal from Canada. I don't know what you're talking about. Let me help you out. Export.gov, the Canada Country Commercial Guide, talking about their tariffs. Now, the NAFTA eliminated tariffs on industrial and most agricultural products imported from the United States. There are tariffs and tariff rate quotas that remain in place on dairy and poultry tariff lines. Canada announced the elimination of tariffs on baby clothing, athletic equipment. Let's cut to the chase here. Agricultural supply management. Canada uses supply management systems to regulate its dairy, chicken, turkey, and egg industries. The regime involves production quotas, producer marketing boards to regulate the price and supply, and tariff weight quotas for imports. Canada's supply management regime severely limits the ability of U.S. producers to increase exports to Canada above those tariff rate quotas. Under the current system, U.S. imports above quota levels are subject to high tariffs. For example, 245% for cheese, 298% for butter. If you try to bring any more cheese or any dairy products over and above the quota we've given, and we think that you're competing unfairly, quote unquote, with our dairy farmers, 250, almost 2.5 times for cheese and almost 3 times for butter. Think about that. There is no such thing as equal tariff across the board with any country. Donald Trump knows this. This is Canada telling you this. This is Canada telling you what they do to the United States. Oh, by the way, also geographical indications. Canada and the European Union announced back in 2014 that they had concluded the Canada-European Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement. The agreement contains Canadian commitments regarding geographical indications that raise serious concerns about whether implementation will reduce access for current and future U.S. agricultural foodstuffs that or producers that trade with Canada. They have an agreement with the EU to make it difficult for the U.S. to trade with Canada. Canada's next door to us. The EU is across the Atlantic Ocean, but they have an agreement with Canada that reduces access for current and future agricultural and foodstuffs. And that was back in 2014. It's been in place for a while. So when you say that Donald Trump is being unfair, no, he's not. And the funnier thing is listening to Canada trying to talk about how they're going to withstand this, how they're doing this, and how they're being patient. They're not being patient. They're being treated like somebody who has an economy that is 1/12 the size of their trading partner. No, your trading partner is not going to put up with any type of trade restrictions that it doesn't like. They don't have to. Therefore, they will not. It's not that complicated. Looking at other areas, though, there's something that is a little bit complicated. and may affect this trade thing. You know that Canada's having a little bit of problem with asylum seekers that the U.S. is not taking in, and they're making their way to Canada. As a matter of fact, it's really not looking good for them. Here's what's going on in in Toronto.
Jamil Bello has called this place home for the past month. A college dorm, but he's not a student. He's a refugee claimant from Nigeria, living in uncertainty.
It's a difficult life to live. I would prefer to have a house.
Across town, a different college dorm, the same uncertainty, coupled with gratitude.
I have to run for my life. And I believe since I've been here, I am more comfortable.
That comfort will be short-lived. By August, students will be moving back in, and the refugee claimants will have to leave.
Well, how do we go? Where do we go? Nobody knows about that. So we'll just wait to take it a day as it comes. And whatever happens, I know the government is not going to leave us on the streets.
The asylum seekers arriving in large numbers across Canada, many are landing in Toronto, which now says its shelter system is overwhelmed, struggling to house more than 3,000 refugee and asylum claimants, in addition to the city's homeless. From Toronto's mayor today, a plea.
We need help. We cannot continue to do this alone. We just don't have the resources to do it alone, and we just don't have the personnel.
A message aimed at both the provincial and federal governments. There is a plan for a triage system that would send refugee and asylum claimants outside major cities. It's working in Quebec, but in Ontario, there's a hiccup.
The challenge is that we've had an election, and as a result of that, the money's in Ottawa waiting to be spent, but Ontario needs to ask for it and share with us the plan they have to spend it.
A waiting game as Toronto officials worry about a temporary housing system that's nearly at its breaking point.
All right, thank you so much. Bye.
Salima Shivji, CBC News, Toronto.
Now, the situation in Toronto isn't just about the sheer number of asylum seekers coming into the country, but also in how their claims are getting stuck in the system. You see, while the flow of refugee claims has grown dramatically, funding for the board that reviews those claims has not.
Even before these waves were coming in, we as the Canadian Bar Association and private practitioners were saying that, the Immigration and Refugee Board needed to staff up, that we needed to get more board members.
The result is a backlog that grows by the month. It's gone from about 43,000 cases at the beginning of the year to more than 57,000 as of the end of May. For claimants, that means longer and longer wait times. It used to be around 60 days. Now, 20 months. That in itself incentivizes more border jumping.
This is then snowballing into a problem where there's more delays, which, due to the delays, people are getting work permits, they're hanging around the country longer, and that's encouraging people to then come across.
So more get stuck in the holding pattern until claimants are either accepted or turned away. In the meantime, they need to live somewhere. And until that backlog gets cut down, the pressure on housing is likely to get worse.
This is beautiful. And if you've been paying attention to the way Trump negotiates, he tends to take things that other people might think are unrelated and work them to his advantage to get what he wants. He's going to put tariffs on Canada. Canada's going to talk about how they're going to huff and puff, but they have a migrant problem that's growing faster than the immigrant problem in the U.S. Did you hear what it said? What used to be 60 days is now 20 months, which is encouraging more people to come into Canada. Canada doesn't have the resources that the United States does to watch people, to police people, to, safeguard its border. So if the United States continues to do what the American people want, which is control its border, then you're going to have more people in Canada while Canada's trying to talk tough about trade. That conversation is going to get them nowhere. Donald Trump is going to win this fight. Canada is using a smoke and mirrors argument on trade because they're simply not a significant sized economy relative to the United States. And they have a problem with Donald Trump's border policy and immigration, but their policy and immigration is going to have to look a lot more like what they consider Trump's to be. They're already overrunning Toronto, and Ottawa, the capital, says it can't help Toronto with its migrant problem. There's no plan. These are headlines from Canada with respect to refugees. There's no plan as Toronto faces refugee shelter crisis. Toronto opens up 800 beds for asylum seekers and asks for millions. Canada wants U.S. cooperation in turning back asylum seekers. That was just at the end of April. Canada talks a lot of nonsense for someone who really doesn't have much in the way of resources. And they're getting ready to learn a very harsh lesson unless they figure out how to work with, as opposed to talk trash to, the current president of the United States. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force of internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM, Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Well, there's been a lot of discussion, of course, about the retirement of Judge Anthony Kennedy, or Justice Anthony Kennedy, from the U.S. Supreme Court. But before I talk about that, I wanted to bring to your attention something that actually happened in Massachusetts that you really need to understand how this is going to affect everything.
Live investigates a major victory for the only school in the country that uses painful electric shocks on its disabled students.
That's right. Mike Bodette has been covering this controversy for years. He's here with details about a new court decision in this. Mike.
Yeah, Ben, a Bristol County judge has sided with the Judge Rotenberg Center in Canton, allowing the school to continue using electric shocks on its students. And tonight, a parents group at the school is welcoming that decision, saying the state tried unsuccessfully to discredit the school.
Andre, now find directions to take your jacket off.
This controversial treatment will continue at the Judge Rotenberg Center in Canton, at least for now. In 2013, soon after this video became public, former Governor Deval Patrick's administration tried to put a stop to this practice known as an aversive treatment. But a judge just denied the motion, saying the state failed to demonstrate that there is now a professional consensus that the Level 3 aversive treatment used at JRC does not conform to the accepted standard of care for treating individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
Obviously, it's controversial.
Governor Baker's Health and Human Services Secretary Mary Lou Sutters says the state must now decide whether to appeal. Do you think they should be continuing to use them?
So what we know is that the use of positive reinforcement is generally accepted practice for a very small number of individuals with very extreme behaviors.
Is the Baker administration more open to this than the Patrick administration?
It's not about whether we're more open or not. What is important is that the Commonwealth, when there is a consent decree, that we ensure we do everything possible, right, to comply with a court order.
Earlier this month, protesters gathered outside the Judge Rotenberg Center, where nearly 60 students are approved to receive electric skin shocks. They're calling on the Food and Drug Administration to act on its 2016 proposal to ban the electric shock devices.
Absolutely, this is torture.
The FDA says it's reviewing comments on the proposed ban, and that decision could still put an end to the electric shocks. As for the Massachusetts ruling, we should know in the next 30 days whether the state will appeal the judge's decision. Mike Bodette, 5 Investigates.
For me, I cannot imagine that ruling happening in a nation in which Hillary Clinton was president. That's a non-progressive ruling, to be honest with you, to side with the professionals in favor of an institute trying to do what's best to control someone's behavior. Now, what wasn't put out there in the video, but was put out in an article that the same TV station put out, talked about the parents. The decision was hailed by parents with students at the Judge Rotenberg Center, where 58 students were approved to receive electric skin shocks back in August of 2017. As parents whose children attend and receive treatment at the Judge Rotenberg Educational Center, we welcome the court's ruling and repudiation of Massachusetts government officials at the Department of Developmental Service who acted in bad faith and impermissibly made treatment decisions for JRC clients, our children, just as officials within the agency had done in the 1980s and 1990s. This is the same Commonwealth, Massachusetts, that was involved with the young lady who actually was a Connecticut resident who came to Boston Children's Hospital and was effectively kidnapped from her parents. Her first name was Justine. I can't remember her last name. This is the same people. And now that court environment that made the decision to keep that young lady from her parents now just decided that what the parents want makes more sense. Let's sideline that, because that's giving you an idea in one of the more liberal or progressive states in the Union where things might be going as you consider the retirement of Justice Anthony Kennedy. Now, Washington Post Robert Barnes had this to say about what he thought it meant with respect to his retirement.
It's hard to overstate the importance of Justice Kennedy's retirement. It gives President Trump a chance to replace the pivotal member of the Supreme Court. It will almost surely move the court further to the right, and it also is likely to prompt a bitter partisan battle between Democrats and Republicans over who fills this seat. But probably the biggest thing that Justice Kennedy is going to be remembered for is gay rights. He authored each of the Supreme Court's important gay rights victories, culminating in his decision about the constitutional right for same-sex couples to marry. But before that, he was the author of the decision that got rid of anti-sodomy laws that targeted gay Americans. He has really been a somewhat surprising hero to the gay rights community. For the most part, Justice Kennedy, as you might expect of a Ronald Reagan appointee, tended conservative. In about 2/3 of the close cases in which he was the deciding vote, he voted with conservative members of the court. But those liberal decisions that he made on social issues are the ones that really would seem to be endangered now.
You know, the Constitution doesn't belong to a bunch of judges. It doesn't belong to a bunch of lawyers. It's yours. It's yours.
But beyond that, Justice Kennedy has been the linchpin of the Supreme Court. Almost never can the conservatives on the court nor the liberals on the court prevail without his support. But he's always identified with some of the court's most important decisions. One of those is Citizens United. He believes that there is a strong First Amendment right to political speech that campaign finance laws often get in the way of. On the other hand, he also has been the reason that affirmative action has remained viable in the U.S. He's been a bitter disappointment to conservatives on the issue of abortion. While Justice Kennedy has often voted for laws that restrict abortion, he refused to go along with a decision that would have wiped out Roe v. Wade. And in recent years, he was the author of a decision that struck down a Texas law that would have made it harder for women to get abortions. One thing that is so important about Justice Kennedy's retirement is that it is the first time in about 25 years that a new justice could radically change the direction of the Supreme Court. The last time that happened was when Clarence Thomas replaced Thurgood Marshall. Thomas, a strong conservative, Marshall, one of the most liberal members of the court. All the justices who have been appointed since Clarence Thomas have replaced justices who are pretty much of the same ideological leanings. It's going to be a real fight, and so the interesting thing will be whether the president decides to go with a very conservative nominee or whether he tries to make it a little easier by looking for someone who might be considered more of a moderate by the Democrats.
That was a lot of interesting discussion that basically said Judge Kennedy seemed to be a middle-of-the-road guy, but was very much instrumental for liberal causes. And the question is whether or not that's going to be remaining the case. Now, for their part, the our good friends in Congress are having an interesting time with this. So, for example, on the day of the retirement announcement, both Chuck Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader, and Mitch McConnell, the Majority Leader, had kind of dueling speeches on the Senate floor.
The Senate stands ready to fulfill its constitutional role by offering advice and consent on President Trump's nominee to fill this vacancy. We will vote to confirm Justice Kennedy's successor this fall. As in the case of Justice Gorsuch, senators will have the opportunity to meet with President Trump's nominee, examine his or her qualifications, and debate the nomination. I have every confidence in Chairman Grassley's conduct of the upcoming confirmation process in the Judiciary Committee. It's imperative that the President's nominee be considered fairly and not subjected to personal attacks.
Our Republican colleagues in the Senate should follow the rule they set in 2016, not to consider a Supreme Court justice in an election year. Senator McConnell would tell anyone who listened that the Senate had the right to advise and consent, and that was every bit as important as the President's right to nominate. Millions of people are just months away from determining the senators who should vote to confirm or reject the President's nominee, and their voices deserve to be heard now, as Leader McConnell thought they should deserve to be heard then. Anything but that would be the absolute height of hypocrisy.
Listening to Chuck Schumer call anybody hypocritical is kind of strange. Let's break down some of the things that he said that are incorrect. The 2016 election was a general election, it was not a midterm. And the issue was not the senators who was voting for the senators. The issue was whether or not the Republicans believed that Barack Obama deserved a third opportunity to name a Supreme Court justice when they felt, and correctly, that the United States electorate did not want him to make that decision. They did not want it from him at that point. He was a lame duck. He was not considered as favorably as Democrats in the Senate would have liked to believe. The proof that he was not that well thought of was the fact that there was a Senate majority that was not Democrat. There was a House majority that was not Democrat. By the time we're getting to the end of 2016 or into 2016, the Democrats had lost across the country almost 1,000 elected offices. People did not want anything more from the Democrats, particularly not another Supreme Court justice. And Donald Trump is not a lame duck, as was Barack Obama. He's coming to the end of his first term, and he has a fairly impressive list of accomplishments for someone who's only been in office less than 2 years. The day after the announcement, at least three Democrat senators, that would be Kirsten Gillibrand, Cory Booker, and Pocahontas Elizabeth Warren, held a rally where they talked about how they're really going to fight and fight and fight. Most of it about abortion. The right to kill babies in the womb. That was their big thing. But here's something I do want to share with you regarding this most recent term in the Supreme Court. What did Justice Kennedy do on 10 of the most important things that appeared? There was the Janus case, where he sided with the majority that said that the union does not have the right to force non-members to pay dues so that they can use that money for things which those non-members would find objectionable. In the gerrymandering cases brought in Maryland and one other state, he basically allowed the state decisions on how that was to be handled to stand. With respect to the cell phone records, the government being able to obtain those without warrants, to do warrantless searches, he said no. About the states being able to regulate sports betting instead of having the federal government do that, he sided with the 10th Amendment right of the states. With respect to the cake baker who rejected the request of a homosexual couple to do a wedding cake for them, he sided with the baker. with the state of Ohio purging its voters list of people who have been inactive for a certain period of time. He sided with the state of Ohio. For Facebook posts being used to conduct warrantless searches, he said, nope, can't. Again, he was consistent about warrantless searches. No. In California, there was a law that made pro-life organizations have to present to women who came to them information on how to get an abortion. And they sued, saying the state shouldn't be able to do that. That got to the Supreme Court, and Kennedy said, no, the state of California should not be able to compel pro-life organizations to provide information on how to get an abortion. On the internet sales tax, well, unfortunately, he sided with the idea of taxing people who buy things on the internet. Last but not least, there was the travel ban that got bounced around so many times. He sided with the president. So let's talk about replacing Justice Kennedy with someone who thinks and likely votes just like him. Do you really believe the progressives would feel that they were better off? The answer is no. If you get somebody to the right of Justice Kennedy, then the real issue comes into play, because they only care about two things. The Democrats care about homosexuals and abortion. And someone to the right of Justice Kennedy could take that out. The Justice Kennedy they have just beat the heck out of unions and promoted states' rights. These are two things that Democrats don't like. But what they really dislike, is anyone going near Roe v. Wade. Forget that the country is moving in that direction. They just want the courts to be the last stand to protect what they hold dear. Well, I'm getting ready to turn this over to my good friend, Ron Edwards. Remember this about the Supreme Court. With that ruling in Massachusetts, which is not a Supreme Court ruling, and what you just heard me list off for what the Supreme Court did decide, there's an American legal agenda, not a progressive one, that seems to be developing in the United States, and it scares progressives to death. And after you hear from Ron Edwards, we'll be back with Hour 2 of Black Man Thinking.
This is Diamond and Silk, and we never miss a page from the Edwards Notebook.
What you are is authentic. What you may think you are could be just your imagination running away with you. Hello, I'm Ron Edwards. On today's page from the Edwards Notebook, in the beginning, after God created the earth and the animals, he formed man in his own image. Soon after, seeing man needed a little help, he created woman. Ever since Adam and Eve rebelled against God, mankind has been trying to come up with ideas, customs, and practices that are in direct opposition to God's wonderful creation of both man and woman. It wasn't enough to engage in unnatural activities between men and between women. To prove they can have it their own way, misguided people proclaim that you are whatever you say you are. But what they don't tell you is that your biological sex is not assigned. Sex is determined at conception by our DNA and stamped into every cell of our body. Human sexuality is binary. Either you have normal Y chromosomes and develop into a male, or you don't, and you develop into a female. Chopping off this or sewing on that doesn't change who you really are. And speaking of the real deal, it's the Ron Edwards Experience, Fridays at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 p.m. Pacific, on AmericaMatters.us, SHR Media, and Sunday midnights on the Talk America Radio Network. I'm Ron Edwards.
Ron Edwards, the new voice of America.
Sponsored by the Tri-County Liberty Coalition.
I have a dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Black Man Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Man Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you're dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Man Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Man Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Man Thinkin.
Stanley Levy with Hour 2 of Black Man Thinkin here on the dominant voice of internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 FM North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 96.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. You remember the shooting back in Valentine's Day, actually, in February of this year, at the Marjorie Stoneham High School in Broward County. The interesting thing about that is, you remember the student activists David Hogue and Emma Gonzalez, also known as Soy Boy and Buzzcut Girl. And you remember the rally that they held where Marco Rubio made that ridiculously sad, pathetic performance, trying to suck up and at the same time maintain his NRA creds, I guess. I don't know what he was doing there. I don't even know why he was there. It was a setup that only a dummy would go to, but there he was. Here's the interesting thing. In the wake of that shooting, which was back in February, the state acted very quickly in response with legislation.
Now we go to Florida and some big news there. Florida Governor Rick Scott just signed a new school safety bill into law while standing next to some of the parents of Stoneman Douglas High School, some of the shooting victims. Among some of the sweeping changes in this now law, it raises the age to purchase a firearm from 18 to 21, requires a 3-day waiting period, bans bump stocks, and has more mental health protections. But when it comes to arming teachers, this is what the governor said.
There are things in this bill that I oppose, and I've been pretty open about that. I still think law enforcement officers should be the ones to protect our schools. I've heard all the arguments for teachers to be armed, and while this bill was significantly changed on this topic, I'm still not persuaded. I'm glad, however, that the plan in this bill is not mandatory, which means it will be up to locally elected officials.
So let's start there with my friend, CNN political commentator Van Jones, host of the Van Jones Show, and we'll get all into your big guest this weekend. But Van, I wanted to start on what we just heard out of Florida. I mean, this is a big, big deal. The fact that this new law flies in the face with so much of what the NRA stands for, especially that moving the age from 18 to 21. This is a Republican governor. This is a Republican, majority state House and state Senate. Is this progress?
I think it is progress, and obviously the people who want more aren't going to be satisfied. And there's some stuff in there that people didn't like. On stuff like this, you're always going to have some stuff that should be in there that's not, stuff that's not in there that should be. But this is progress, and listen, how many times do we sit here? You're in tears. You're talking to somebody in tears. Year after year, month after month, incident after incident, and nothing got passed. Nothing got passed. No, not one bill got passed. And so the idea that now the seal has been broken. The NRA can say we do not want something to happen, and a Republican governor can say it is going to happen. And guess what? We're still here. The world hasn't come to an end. That means other governors can also step up, and we can start trying to figure stuff out. Let me just say one more thing. I don't know if any of these things will make a difference or not, but that's the problem. after 10 years of this, we should have a lot of experiments that have been going on in this state, in that state, in the federal level, trying to figure out how to get the violence down. The NRA has essentially stopped all progress. So there's no ability for us to do anything to figure out what might work. If it turns out this bill doesn't work or has some negative consequences, you can change it. You can amend it. That's called democracy. But you can't pass any bill ever. That's not democracy.
What Van Jones and CNN chose to overlook in all this democracy was the fact that the law contained a provision for arming teachers or others who were not law enforcement in order to take care of the situation in the schools, and left it up to local elected officials, not those in the state capitol, but those in the counties and in the towns and on the school boards, to determine if and how they were going to do that. Now, this happened in March. Remember, the shooting happened in February. The next month, a law was passed. Well, here's what I find interesting. At least 3 counties were already moving. Here's what was happening in the Orlando area in Florida.
4:30, a change local school districts are making. Yesterday, we told you how Polk County is now training potential armed guardians. Last night, Lake County school leaders approved a limited guardian program. And tonight, school safety takes center stage in Volusia County. As News 6 reporter Lauren Korn tells us, board members are talking about what kind of presence the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Safety Act will have in their schools.
The school board will be voting here today at 5:30 as to which option of the plan is best for implementing and funding the school marshal program. And I'm told once it's approved, people can start applying for the job as early as tomorrow. The clock is ticking on how the Volusia County School District will be keeping your children safe under the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act, or Senate Bill 7026.
Tonight's about which option they wish to move forward with their approval this evening. There are 3 options that we're going to be proposing.
Option A hires 38 school guardians to be placed in elementary schools and 32 school resource officers staffed in middle and high schools. Option B hires 49 school guardians to be placed in larger high schools, which includes 6 substitutes. And Option C hires 55 school guardians and only have school resource officers at middle and high schools.
So all 3 come with a hefty price tag, so anywhere from $3.2 million to $3.6 million.
Greg Aiken, Chief Operating Officer, says guardians would be all new hires and undergo 132 hours of extensive training by the Sheriff's Office and 12 hours of diversity training.
They do not have arrest authority nor detain authority, so they're there for the sole purpose of trying to maintain security on campus.
Aiken says it'll be tough no matter which option they choose, as the district is already financially struggling, saying the mandate will cause some issues in their general funding, but says they'll be doing their best with what they have.
We've been working extensively with the sheriff and his staff to put together a great plan to be able to meet the mandates moving forward.
And coming up at 5:30, you'll hear from Sheriff Mike Chitwood and what he has to say about the current proposal. In DeLand, Lauren Korn, News 6.
That report was filed on the 12th of June. So roughly 3 months after that had happened, school year wasn't out yet, of course, but they're already working on how they're going to put armed guards in the schools in Orlando, in Lake County, in Volusia County. By the way, speaking of Volusia County, back on the 20th of June, there was another news report showing what they were doing with respect to this issue.
Our big story at 10:30, so many people want to be school guardians, Volusia County had to take down their job posting.
The news station's Brian Scott has the story.
Those guardians are going to cover all of Volusia County's elementary schools, and it sounds like they're going to have a big pool of candidates to pick from.
Just 5 days. And it's already offer closed.
We got 180 applications.
People wanting to pack heat and protect Volusia County schools.
We already vetted about 50 out that didn't meet the qualifications.
But school spokesperson Nancy Waits also seen a lot of promise. People with military and law enforcement backgrounds ready for this challenge. The state deciding every school must have an armed guard starting next year. For Volusia, the guardians will fill in the empty spots where they don't already have resource officers.
They're going to be vetted very much like a deputy would at the sheriff's
sheriff's office.
The sheriff's even helping make these hires and train them, providing more than actually required by the state, because this is new territory here.
We have never seen guns in the budget. That is historical for a school district to see.
And for the district to have to pay for it. The county's now working with them to figure out how to cover all these new costs. But Waite says finding those 44 guardians may turn out to be the easy part.
We thought that there would be folks that were interested. 180 was a little bit of a surprise for us.
But between picking out their final candidates and figuring out all those budgetary details, they got to do it fast. The school district says they want all those guardians in place at these schools by the start of the school year. In DeLand, Brian Scott, Fox 35 News.
So I got 3 counties in Florida who are already working on this, and one of them who opened up a job posting and got more than 4 times as many applicants as they had openings. And they're committed to being ready on day 1. Now, here's the thing. Those counties in Florida that are preparing are not Broward County, where the shooting occurred. They seem to be dragging their feet. Here's what's going on in Broward County as of the 26th of June.
Off the top at 6, we could be seeing armed security guards at Broward County schools when students return in August, thanks to a new state law created in the aftermath of the deadly school shooting in Parkland. The Coach Aaron Feist Guardian program allows certain employees to be armed if they train with the local sheriff's office.
State law previously authorized only sworn law enforcement to carry guns. CBS 4's Ted Scouten live in Fort Lauderdale with the latest on the district's efforts to meet the August 15th deadline. Ted.
Yeah, Rick and Rutabaga, Broward School District, just like districts across the state, are scrambling right now, trying to figure out how to get armed security on every campus, but they have to do it in the next 2 months.
We can't allow ourselves to be boxed in. We got to explore every option that we can.
City and school officials, along with police, trying to beat an August 15th deadline to have armed security on every school campus in Broward as part of the new state law after the massacre at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. There's very little time to get people in place.
The governor and the legislator dropped the ball. Clearly, this wasn't well thought out. It was maybe done with the best intentions.
Broward has 234 schools and 166 current school resource officers. They're looking to hire about 100 additional personnel. The question is who? There's no time to get school resource officers into the role because of extensive training.
The first opportunity for us to have certified law enforcement officers in the public schools would be August of 2020.
Broward Schools already said would not take part in the Guardian program, allowing current school staff to be armed. But now they're looking at a hybrid-type program.
We need to look at alternatives, and that alternative to me would be retired police officers and military.
But with only 2 months until school starts, the chances of getting 100 people hired, trained for 150 hours, and in place are slim.
We can't get there to start a school, then we need to work with our local law enforcement agencies and municipalities to figure out what kind of stopgap measure that we can put in place.
That means police departments could be asked to take officers off the street and place them on campus until the new guardians are ready. And the district will likely vote on the issue at their June 26th meeting. Live in Fort Lauderdale, Ted Scout, CBS 4 News.
And they did vote. The Broward County School Board decided that staffing every school with armed personnel is the answer to gun violence. They took the action as a result of that February 14th massacre at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, where they lost 14 students and 3 adult staff. The board voted unanimously. Help me out with this. This happened in February. The law giving you the option for dealing with this was passed in March, the next month. We're just now in June having a school board vote about how to do this, and you are the county in which the massacre occurred. Why'd you drag your feet? Saying that the governor and the legislature dropped the ball? No, they passed legislation. Well, they didn't give us more money. Nobody gets more money in a state budget than education. The question is, what are you guys doing with it? You need to make priorities. And once you knew the law had passed, why weren't you already doing it? I have other schools who actually opened up a job listing, and they were inundated, relatively speaking, with applicants. You're just now starting? Why is that? And I guarantee you, or at least this is my opinion, the only reason you're starting now is you got pushback from parents. You heard the comments in the video where people were complaining, I don't know if we're going to do this, I don't know how this is going to happen, somebody dropped the ball, but all of a sudden you get a unanimous school board vote. I wonder how that happened. Let me help you out with this. They put this in the hands of local government, which meant it got closer to the parents. And the parents said, you put somebody with a gun in that school to protect my child. We're not going to do Sandy Hook here. We're not going to do Marjorie Stoneham Douglas High School again here. You put somebody with a gun. And the school board responded. But they waited so long to respond that they put themselves in a bind. So when the next time somebody tells me that those who have close relationships with teachers' unions care about students, you remember how long it took the school board members in Broward County to decide to act on the law that was passed to protect students from being shot in school. To me, this is ridiculous. And it's inexcusable. And also remember this, while the left is crazy about the law for background checks and things of that nature, the real change that came out of this law was something that the American people have been saying for quite some time. Put somebody with the right intentions in the school with a gun to make sure those who come to the school with a gun and the wrong intentions have something to confront other than our children. That is an American perspective. You want to shoot somebody? We have somebody to shoot you. But if you don't start none, there won't be none. Stay out of our schools with your guns to kill our children, and nobody will kill you. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force of Internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us, also WDDQ Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. So now we have black politicians, once again, seeking an irrelevant federal law. And in this case, we're talking about black politicians in the form of the 3 U.S. senators who are considered black, and that would be Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, and Tim Scott, 2 Democrats, 1 Republican, Scott being notably the Republican. The Hill ran a story on this, interestingly, back on the 29th, saying that the Senate's only African American, I hate that term, I'll call them black, lawmakers rolled out legislation to make lynching a federal crime. The legislation would make lynching the willful act of murder by a collection of people assembled with the intention of committing an act of violence upon any person, punishable as a hate crime. I need this law. Black people need this law? Okay. Booker added that Congress's inability to pass anti-lynching legislation is a travesty. Really? Okay. Well, Complex News, who is no stranger to stepping into things that have a racial tone in politics, had this to say about the whole issue of an lynching law back on the 1st of July.
For Complex News, I'm Hanuman Welch. 3 black senators, Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, and Tim Scott, introduced a bill called the Justice for Victims of Lynching Act of 2018, which proposes a law to make lynching a federal hate crime. Booker, alongside Harris of California and Scott of South Carolina, are the only 3 black senators out of 100 in the United States. In order to pass the bill, they will need the support of 60 senators through a voice vote. So far, the bill has been co-sponsored by Bernie Sanders, Angus King, and 15 more Democratic senators. Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey said this about the bill. It's a travesty that despite repeated attempts to do so, Congress still hasn't put anti-lynching legislation on the books. This bill will right historical wrongs by acknowledging our country's stained past and codifying into law our commitment to abolish this shameful practice. Harris and Scott also released statements on the bill. Lynching is a dark, despicable part of our history, and we must acknowledge that lest we repeat it. Their proposal comes 2 weeks after Representative Bobby Rush of Illinois and 35 members of the Congressional Black Caucus introduced a similar bill. And as for the senators, they plan to amend the U.S. Code to, quote, specify that lynching is a crime in itself that would warrant an enhanced sentence under existing federal hate crime statutes. That's all for now. For everything else, subscribe to Complex on YouTube. For Complex News, I'm Hanuman Welch.
Let's consider this for just a moment. The legislation redefines lynching. The willful act of murder by a collection of people assembled with the intention of committing an act of violence upon any person. Last time I looked, lynching usually involved a rope. It did involve a mob or a crowd. And it involved the fact that there was no legal sanction, there was no due process of law. This is a different definition. And so now what we're talking about is expanding it beyond blacks, of course, because it doesn't say it, but against black people. It says any person. Now, can I ask you a question? Since when is the willful act of murder not harshly punished in U.S. law, either at the state or federal level? And when is the last time a lynching occurred? Now remember, we had 3 black senators putting this forward. When last did this occur? The answer to that question is 1981. It's been 37 years since anyone's been lynched. Why do I need a law to make something a hate crime? First of all, if it's murder, murder is a capital offense. Do I need to make it a hate crime? If it's already a capital offense, you can already face the death penalty, and many have, for murdering someone. So I need this on the books to acknowledge that this was a terrible part of it. Why don't I just have a Senate resolution? That would accomplish the same thing. It would give you the same acknowledgement. And the most important thing to notice, to me, is who's bringing this up. The most impotent people in the U.S. Congress, the black elected officials. All of the Congressional Black Congress caucus, I call them the Clown Brown caucus, none of them are worth a tinker's darn. You remember that John Conyers had been introducing the whole 40 acres and a mule discussion ever since 1989, and he couldn't even get the Democrats to vote on it. Couldn't even get it to the floor for a vote. But he kept pushing it as though it really mattered to black people, as though it was going to make a difference to black people. It was never going to pass. A discussion was never going to happen because there's no sense in discussing something that has no chance of passage. Now, this, of course, isn't the first time that the Senate or anyone else has tried to get lynching put down as some type of a particular crime, a special crime, looking for a special category to put lynching in as though it's anything other than straight up murder. That's all it is murder. But back in 2005, the Senate tried and failed. And you had them issuing a rather interesting apology about it publicly after they failed to make it happen.
In the event that the states need assistance to add an added penalty for whatever the underlying crime is, that the federal government can assist state and local law enforcement.
I just want to add something on that because this has been a question that's come up, and I'm a supporter of the hate crimes legislation that has not passed but almost passed the Congress on several occasions. This was a crime, but it was more than a crime. What these photographs in this book show, which prompted me to step forward and many of our colleagues, as I said, is not just the victims and their pictures. It is the pictures of the onlookers, the children that were let out of Sunday school to witness these lynchings. Shops were closed so employees could attend the lynchings. The railroads had special excursions and discount tickets for people to go. This was a community spectacle, and the Senate knew it. And the Senate of the United States knew it. It was a community spectacle. It was an act of terrorism. This was not a crime committed by criminals against criminals or people who could have, been guilty. This was really an act of terrorism, domestic terrorism. And I think it's quite appropriate today that we're discussing this as our country leads the fight against terrorism abroad. We try to remind Americans what it really is and how you have to fight it. We can begin by understanding it existed right here in this nation. And so it is not just a crime. It was a community event. And the pictures in this gentleman's book will show you that, which is what is very compelling about this action we're taking today.
Senator, you said a minute ago about the vote that you were asked to do it this way without an up or down vote. Is that a suggestion that there were members who were perhaps inclined to vote against this but didn't want to be embarrassed by having to do so in public?
Well, let me tell you something. The Senate is trying to get its business done. We're having some difficulty getting business done. And so those of us sponsoring this resolution thought this was business that needed to get done. And we're doing it the best way we know how to do it. And so we've put this resolution before the Senate. We're having a 3-hour debate. Senators have been volunteered to speak. I'm pleased that all the speaking slots have been asked for, and we have had this resolution signed. If senators want to affix their name to this document, they may. If they choose not to, that will be recorded.
That was 2005, another time when Republicans were in the majority in the House and Senate. And this, of course, went nowhere. For those who do not know, I am black. Let me make this abundantly clear. I could not care less about someone passing a law about something that has not happened in nearly 4 decades. I don't care. I have other things that are happening to black people right now that I wish were illegal. I wish abortion were illegal. I wish illegitimacy were illegal. I know that's a bridge way too far. I wish infecting anyone with a sexually transmitted disease were illegal because all these things disproportionately affect black people. I wish immigration reform happened to the point where if you don't have a valid reason to be here, and if you're not following a prescribed legal process to get here, that not only are you not allowed to enter, but if you are found, you are put on the next thing smoking out of the country. That would be of benefit to black people. I wish there were a law whenever you encountered an illegal gang member from a foreign country, that the military was called in and they were given rules of engagement to kill on sight. I wish that were the case, because that would also be something that would protect black people and Americans in general from MS-13 and other gangs that are coming up from south of the border. It would protect against drug cartel members who already do just a bang-up business in states like Arizona. That's what I want to see. But I'm not going to see that. I'm not going to see what matters for black people. What I'm going to see from a party that has no relevance, that has no, let me change that. The Democrat Party has no message. The black people within the Democrat Party have no relevance. They mean nothing. They are the best paid and best dressed public assistance recipients in this country. They do nothing. They're also among the most vocal. But wherever you find them, if you go back to their districts and look at the conditions under which their constituents live, you will normally come away with the question, why are you guys voting for these individuals? Why are you voting for these clowns? My great disappointment in all this would be that Senator Tim Scott, for whom I have a modicum of respect, would allow peer pressure or misguided judgment to allow him to affix his name to an unnecessary and irrelevant piece of proposed legislation. I don't need a law. This doesn't help black people. Giving me an emotional moment about something that doesn't occur doesn't help black people. Donald Trump, who everyone wants to call a racist, though hard to figure that one out, has actually done something that has helped black people. He has put policies in place that have continued to see black unemployment and Hispanic unemployment in this country decline, and the overall unemployment rate is under 4%. That matters more than an anti-lynching law. He's actually making it easier for people to get to work by putting people on the Supreme Court who favor the rights of those who want to work over the interests of unions. That benefits black people, because some people tend to want to forget that one of the ways blacks were kept out of the workforce in this country was through unions. I'm not getting that from these people. What I'm getting is nonsense. And I'm offended. An anti-lynching law. You need to vote these clowns out, but I don't think there are any safer Democrat seats in Congress than those held by the Clown Brown Caucus. They're going to be there. I don't know that there's anything more safe than Kamala Harris's Senate seat or Cory Booker's Senate seat. So those clowns will remain. This foolishness is simply going to continue. But wherever you can, if you want to see it reduced, you better vote these Democrats out. Period. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinkin will be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin, here on the dominant force of internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1, FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5, North Florida Talk Radio, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 96.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Final segment of the show. Do you remember when you turned on the news to get information, and you had reason to trust that the information that you were receiving was accurate? Of course, we're going back a long ways into the days of Walter Cronkite and Edward R. Murrow and other people whose integrity as journalists, regardless of what they were as people, was something upon which you could rely, because their journalistic integrity, which meant they made a habit of trying to disseminate the truth and fact so that you would be able to make decisions in your life based on that, that's what something that people could look to. And it was because some people practiced their trade in that way that they became personalities of trust. It wasn't because they were necessarily nice looking. It wasn't necessarily because they had a great speaking voice. Of course, to be on air, nice to have that. But it was the idea that what they were being told was something they could rely upon as being accurate. Well, those days are gone. I don't know if they're gone forever, but they're definitely gone for right now. The latest example is actually being twisted on the back end as a rare moment of journalistic integrity. Last week, we had another mass shooting. These are coming, the reporting on these is becoming rather commonplace and part of a political agenda. A gentleman went into a newspaper organization in Annapolis, Maryland, opened fire, killing 5 people. Terrible. What was not reported until after the fact, the first thing was the reaction, oh, we've had another mass shooting, we need gun control, what's wrong with these people, what about mental health, all the normal reaction that we've come to expect. It took a while for the news to come out that basically this is someone who had a long-standing issue with this news organization and had told them that he was going to do this eventually, and he finally simply followed up on what he was going to do, what he said he would do. Connor Berry was a reporter who decided to add to all that the idea that this man was a Trump supporter and took with him into the building a Make America Great Again hat and dropped it on the floor right before he started shooting. That is an outright, abject lie. Simple as that. So here's what we get when that lie is found out.
A Massachusetts newspaper reporter has resigned after falsely suggesting the perpetrator of the deadly shooting at a Maryland newspaper was wearing a President Donald Trump-inspired Make America Great Again hat. The Republican newspaper in Springfield reports Connor Berry has apologized for tarnishing the good work of fair-minded journalists everywhere in his Friday resignation letter. Berry tweeted an image of the familiar red hat and suggested 38-year-old Jared Ramos had dropped a similar one on the Capitol Gazette's newsroom floor before opening fire and killing 5 people Thursday. The tweet has since been taken down. The Republican's executive editor Wayne Phaneuf says journalists must be more vigilant than ever in their efforts to be fair and accurate. Trump frequently criticizes reporters as peddlers of fake news.
So we get back to fair and accurate, which is basically that's supposed to be the calling card of journalism, that you're fair and that you're accurate. Connor Berry, for his part, put out a tweet regarding his resignation, I guess this is what it is. And this is what I call a very weak acceptance of responsibility. Here's what he tweeted. Folks, my 21-year career as a journalist, and he puts that in quotation marks, and turns out that's where it belongs, a fancy term that makes my skin crawl, frankly. Okay, so you hated being in the profession, but you were there for 21 years. So how long have you been lying, Mr. Berry? All right, never mind. Let me get back to this. A term that makes my skin crawl, frankly, came to a screeching halt yesterday with one stupid, regrettable tweet. It wasn't stupid and regrettable. It was an abject lie. He goes on, can't take it back, wish I could. My sincere apologies to all good, hard-working reporters and to POTUS, President of the United States, supporters. So what you did was you put a stain on all reporters who are not necessarily seen as good or hardworking, and you slander or you cast aspersions on more than half the electorate. And what you're calling it is, well, it was stupid and regrettable, and you have yet to use the word lie. I lied. I said something that I know wasn't true. Or I reported something as fact that I did not take the time to verify as true. the responsible thing to do if you cannot verify something as fact is to not report it at all, since you're trying to be fair and accurate. But I digress. He wasn't trying to be fair or accurate. That's just the way that goes. Now, this is this goes along with what the president, his term fake news that he coined. This kind of goes along with what's been happening for quite some time in the so-called journalistic profession. You may recall this from June of last year, at least the Fox News report. And I'm not trying to say that Fox News is not also guilty of the same fake news. I've caught them saying things. I'm like, I don't even know why you said that. I've already read that, and I know that I've already read about that, and I know what you're saying is not accurate. But they did report this accurately about another news organization.
President Trump is crowing tonight about the resignations of 3 CNN employees. He says it's more proof of fake news in the media. Our media analyst here at Fox News and host of Media Buzz, Howard Kurtz, with a look at the very real consequences.
President Trump has been battling CNN for a long time.
I'm not going to give you a question.
Can you stay categorically?
You are fake news.
He renewed his attack as CNN retracted a story that led to the resignations of 3 journalists, investigative chief Lex Harris, reporter Thomas Frank, and assistant managing editor and Pulitzer Prize winner Eric Lischblau. Wow, CNN had to retract big story on Russia with 3 employees forced to resign. What about all the other phony stories they do? Fake news. The story alleged that Anthony Scaramucci, a top Trump advisor, was under investigation over ties to a Russian investment fund and discussed lifting U.S. sanctions against Moscow in a secret meeting with a fund executive last January. But Scaramucci says there was no secret meeting, that after a speech in Davos, the Russian official came up to him to say hello at a restaurant. The network said the story did not meet CNN's editorial standards, but did not say its allegations were untrue. Scaramucci told Fox News the story is a lie that should never have been published, but said he's accepted CNN's apology and has no plans to sue. A reporter raised the story today at the White House.
If the media can't be trusted to report the news, then that's a dangerous place for America. You mentioned the Scaramucci story where they had to have reporters resign.
CNN responded to another Trump jibe about its ratings being way down by saying it just had its most watched second quarter ever. This is the second recent embarrassment for the network run by Jeff Zucker. CNN reported before James Comey's Senate testimony that he would contradict the president by saying he had never told Mr. Trump he wasn't under investigation in the Russia probe. Comey said just the opposite.
For a president whose rallying cry is fake news, he tweeted today that CBS, NBC, ABC, New York Times, Washington Post are also in that category. It was a day to claim vindication. CNN has suffered a blow to its credibility, but may have mitigated the damage with the quick retraction and by parting company with the journalists involved. Bill? Howard, thank you. Howard Kurtz here in Washington.
How do you mitigate the damage when you continue lying? He talked about the Scaramucci story and that, well, they retracted that and parted company. But what about the other lie he just cited where they indicated Comey was going to say one thing and put that out in the news? Really, hey, wait for this. Comey's going to sit there and just blow Trump up. And Comey does the exact opposite. So this is basically, lie perpetuated, lie compounded, because you have a lying news organization reporting on a known liar in Jim Comey. But how is it that you're mitigating the damage when you have to fire people for lying, but while other lies are going on? Notice how far journalistic integrity seems to have fallen at CNN. One of the people they had to fire, or who was encouraged to resign and did so, had won a Pulitzer Prize. You would think someone who had been celebrated in the profession would actually have more journalistic integrity, but he does not. Let's not forget what journalism is supposed to be about. The Fourth Estate is there to let people know what is going on, particularly with elected officials and in government, so that the people can exercise their oversight appropriately. It is dependent upon telling people what is factually correct. You don't always know the truth, but you can at least report the facts. Unless, of course, you're CNN or NBC or CBS or ABC. I will say that from what I have noticed, there has been a slight uptick in journalistic integrity most recently because of the consistent pressure brought to bear by the President of the United States and the accompanying reaction of the American people who no longer trust journalists. They don't trust them. The same people who elected Donald Trump do not trust the media, and the reason for that is they've been caught lying so many times, and they are unwilling to clean themselves up. Well, CNN had those 3 people resign. You think those are the only 3 people who were lying at CNN? Oh, for goodness sake. Speaking of other liars, can someone explain to me how Brian Williams is still in broadcast journalism? This is a report from June of 2015.
NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams.
And Brian Williams will not be returning to the anchor chair at NBC Nightly News. The anchorman was suspended in February for 6 months for exaggerating stories about his experiences in a war zone.
I made a mistake in recalling the events of 12 years ago. As I said, I was traveling in an aircraft that was hit by RPG fire. I was instead in a following aircraft.
An internal investigation by NBC reportedly found 10 to 12 additional instances of exaggerating. Lester Holt, who has been filling in for Williams, will now assume the role full-time. Williams is not being fired. He'll be given a role at MSNBC, the network's cable news channel.
Okay, how does that work? We catch you lying. We suspend you for lying. We do an investigation about your lies and find 10 or 12 more lies. And you're supposed to be a journalist, an on-air journalist, whose stock in trade is supposed to be fact and truth. And and not only do we not fire you, we move you to another organization that is known to lie. You had liars there like Ed Schultz, and who's now with RT. You have liars there like Martin Bashir, who I don't know where he's gone, and frankly am not that concerned. So now you take the lying Brian Williams and put him on lying MSNBC and continue to employ him? But you want people to believe that NBC is a serious and credible news organization. Or just that MSNBC is where we do our lying. We don't really have anything of integrity going on over there, which would make sense because the same people who had Melissa Harris Perry on air and Al Sharpton on air can't be taken seriously as a news organization. But this is the problem that we have. I don't know if it's the pressure that comes up from having so many channels. I mean, it used to be you only had the limited over-air broadcast networks. There weren't many of them. And as a result, it was easier, perhaps, to ride herd on people and make sure that their information was correct before it went to air. But now you have hundreds of stations, maybe thousands. And when you talk about the different websites whose journalism is as good as their grammar, you have all kinds of opportunities for something other than journalism to occur and to do so unchecked. And that's a problem. Now, one instance of real, what I would call journalistic ethics, not necessarily integrity, happened back in March of 2014.
Last night, RT made international headlines when one of our anchors went on the record and said Russian intervention in Crimea is wrong. And indeed, as a reporter on this network, I face many ethical and moral challenges, especially me personally, coming from a family whose my grandparents came here as refugees during the Hungarian Revolution, ironically to escape the Soviet forces. I have family on the opposite side, on my mother's side, that sees the daily grind of poverty. And I'm very lucky to have grown up here in the United States. I'm the daughter of a veteran. My partner is a physician at a military base where he sees every day the first-hand accounts of the ultimate prices that people pay for this country. And that is why, personally, I cannot be part of a network funded by the Russian government that whitewashes the actions of Putin. I'm proud to be an American and believe in disseminating the truth, and that is why, after this newscast, I'm resigning.
That was Liz Wall, formerly of RT. I like to recall what she said. I am proud to be an American, and she believes in disseminating the truth. That is supposedly what the American press is supposed to be about. We're proud of our citizenship, who we are as citizens, and we want to tell the truth, not the least of which reason being because we're proud of the citizenship that we have, and we want to maintain the country in such a way, and disseminating the truth to those who would elect government officials and hold them accountable is one way to do it. We don't do that anymore. That's not what happens in journalism much anymore. It is not marked by that, and that's a problem. You're going to need to do some real soul searching in order to figure out how to proceed forward. You have a lot of information outlets. You have the job now of sifting through them to understand what is accurate. If you are not motivated to do that, then you really don't deserve the freedoms that America affords you, because you're being lied to. And you're going to have to figure it out. And there's another election coming up in November. That's our show. As always, may God bless and keep you. And until next week, do take care, and I look forward to being with you again.
You've been listening to Black Man Thinkin' with your host, Stan Levy. Join Stan midnight to 2 a.m. That's late Monday night into early Tuesday morning. And find him on the web at Black Man Thinkin' without the G. That's blackmanthinkin.com.